Imagine a quiet morning in a small, tidy kitchen. An elderly woman, let's call her Margaret, is going about her routine. She boils the kettle for tea, opens the fridge, moves between the living room and the hallway. To a casual observer, it's just a normal Tuesday. But for a group of social workers and for her daughter miles away, these tiny mundane actions are being translated into a steady stream of data points. Every time that kettle clicks or the front door opens, a digital heartbeat pulses through a network of small white sensors. They're just tucked away on her walls and appliances. And there's a profound sense of relief in this setup. For Margaret's daughter, it's a deep-down satisfaction, that feeling that even when she's not there, her mother is being watched over by this invisible digital guardian. No more panicked phone calls because a morning check-in went unanswered. The sensors offer a promise. We will catch the crisis before it happens. If Margaret stops using the kettle or stays in bed too long, an alert will trigger. It feels like the long-awaited solution to a social care system that's just stretched to its breaking point. A way to preserve independence through 204/7 vigilance. But then the conversation shifts. While Margaret feels safe, her daughter finds herself staring at an app on her phone at 2 in the morning, obsessing over a sensor that hasn't updated in an hour. Is the Wi-Fi down? Or did her mother fall? The reassurance has morphed into a new kind of digital tether that she can never truly switch off. Meanwhile, Margaret starts to feel this prickle of unease. She knows that if she spends too long in the bathroom or forgets to close the cupboard, someone, somewhere, might interpret that data as a sign that she can no longer live alone. This instantaneous shift from seeing technology as a liberating savior to viewing it as a source of anxiety and, well, digital surveillance, that's where the real story begins. We're told these sensors are the ironclad proof we need to fix social care, yet the reality is far messier. It raises a haunting question. In our rush to use data to prevent a crisis, are we accidentally eroding the very human touch that makes care worth having? And if the data only tells half the story, who fills in the rest? Okay, so let's unpack this. That story of Margaret and her daughter, it just perfectly captures the tension at the heart of our deep dive today. You have the technological promise on one side, and then the human reality of remote care on the other. The goal, universally, is to help aging populations maintain independence and security. But getting there is proving to be far more complicated. It touches on everything from fiscal policy, the economics of care, all the way to advanced algorithm design.
Right. What we're really exploring here is this rapidly evolving landscape of telecare. That includes, remote monitoring, wearable AI, Internet of Things devices. And for you, the listener, this deep dive is about understanding not just the mechanics of the technology, how a sensor works, but the really profound ethical, financial, and diagnostic implications as these systems move from being pilot projects to becoming mainstream solutions. They're being rolled out for aging populations and for social services that are just severely stretched. We're looking at a macro shift in how society handles the reality of human longevity and the care infrastructure needed to support it.
So we have a clear mission then. We need to understand the structural pressures, why systems are being forced to adopt this tech, what that financial imperative looks like on the ground. Then we'll pivot to the deeply human side. What this constant digital vigilance does to the people being monitored and, just as importantly, the family members who are doing the monitoring. And finally, we have to ask that critical promise question. How effective are the most advanced AI detection tools when they're tasked with making diagnoses that can alter a person's life?
And we have to start with that fundamental structural problem, especially when we're looking at social care in many Western nations, but particularly in the UK. Telecare is being pushed as a policy solution, not primarily because it's seen as superior to human care, but because the existing system is struggling under severe, almost existential financial pressure. It just can't keep up. The current model of sustained in-person home care is becoming financially unsustainable for providers across the board.
And the numbers you've pulled out really lay this crisis bare with, a shocking clarity. It's not just general inflation we're talking about. It's a perfect storm of rising costs meeting public funding that just isn't keeping up.
That's the crux of it. Home care providers are facing actual documented cost increases that average about 10% across their operations. And this increase isn't speculative. It's driven by specific, unavoidable pressures. You've got the need to raise staff wages to attract and retain people in a really competitive market, rapidly rising fuel costs for carriers who have to be mobile, soaring insurance premiums, and the enormous perpetual expense of recruitment to deal with industry-wide turnover.
Let's break down some of those mandated cost pressures because they represent policy choices that are directly, making the problem worse. You mentioned wages and tax components. Can we zero in on how government regulations are hitting these providers providers the hardest?
Absolutely. The increases are mandatory. First, you have the national living wage, or NLW. That's scheduled to rise by a pretty substantial 6.7% to £12.21 per hour in April 2025. Now, this rise is necessary for staff, for retention, for their quality of life, but it creates an immediate mandatory financial burden on the providers. And then second, happening at the same time, there are mandatory increases in employer national insurance contributions. And NI, they're rising by 1.2 percentage points to 15%. So providers have to pay the worker more, and then they have to pay a higher tax rate on those increased wages.
Higher wages and higher taxes on those wages. I mean, that alone is a massive hit to what I assume are already thin margins. But the most kind of insidious pressure point you highlighted involves the part-time workforce. And that's the backbone of flexible home care, right?
It is the critical detail. It determines whether a provider can actually staff the scattered, high-demand shifts that define home care. Providers rely so heavily on flexible, often part-time staff to meet varying client needs. You know, a quick morning check, a lunch visit, a bedtime routine. The threshold before employers have to pay national insurance on these workers' earnings is being dramatically slashed from £9,000 to just £5,000.
So in essence, that policy change means that the vast majority of part-time flexible staff who previously didn't incur a significant employer NI liability, now they do. It just drastically increases the overall tax burden for the exact type of staff that providers rely on most for their operational flexibility.
Right.
It's a structural barrier to employing the workforce model they need.
It fundamentally changes the economics of using flexible part-time staff. It just does. Providers who built their entire models around offering these crucial short shifts now face exponentially higher tax liabilities simply for maintaining their operational structure.
So we've established that providers are facing this 10% average cost increase driven by these mandates. Now we get to the crucial failure point, the revenue side. Why isn't public funding keeping pace? If the funding uplifts from local authorities, the LAs and the NHS often cover less than half of these actual increases, why haven't we seen a wider systemic collapse already? What are the inefficiencies here?
Well, the problem isn't just the lack of money, it's the bureaucratic structure and a reliance on very short-term thinking. Local authorities, you see, they're constrained by their own budgets and, frankly, political cycles. They often default to providing the minimum legal uplift required, operating on the assumption that providers will just absorb the rest or rely on reserves. This lack of parity between rising costs and public funding uplifts guarantees financial unsustainability. It means the system is operating on these short-term financial fixes, delayed payments, complex contracting, sometimes even illegal underpricing. It's not tackling the profound structural inefficiency and bureaucracy that are causing the crisis in the first place.
And when the math just doesn't add up, a 10% cost increase offset by maybe a 4% funding increase, that forces providers onto one of three inevitable and very problematic paths. What are the dangers of those paths?
The choices are all detrimental to the vulnerable population being cared for. The first, and arguably the most damaging, is that providers are forced to simply close down completely. This leads to immediate and chaotic service disruption, and it leaves local authorities scrambling to find replacement care, which often results in gaps where the most vulnerable people receive no care at all.
And the second option, it creates this deeply unfair two-tier system of care.
Absolutely. Providers may decide, you know what, we're going to stop taking these underfunded local authority contracts. They shift solely to serving private clients who can pay the full sustainable cost. This effectively leaves the local authority clients, who are often the most complex, most vulnerable, and lowest income individuals, completely unsupported. It concentrates the crisis among those who are least able to cope.
And the third path, while it maintains the appearance of service, it risks sacrificing quality just for survival.
Precisely. Providers might continue operating under those underfunded LA contracts, but they're forced to cut corners in ways that severely compromise quality. This could mean reducing the length of visits, cutting essential training for staff, or increasing the workload on already exhausted carers. This constant pressure to reduce cost while maintaining operations poses a serious, often unseen risk to vulnerable people who are relying on those essential services. The whole system is just struggling because it's prioritizing its own structural survival through short-term fixes over long-term sustainable quality.
Okay, so if the human care network is buckling under this immense financial strain, then the policy response, the government and local authority strategy, is to enact this massive, fast-tracked shift toward proactive and preventative telecare. If they can't afford the human staff, they have to automate and monitor. What does that fully connected technological system actually look like in theory?
It's an ambition that goes far beyond just a simple emergency button. It's a commitment to what's called a hybrid model of care, involving a very complex, wide socio-technical network. The goal is to move from reactive alarms, where the care system only responds after a crisis like a fall, to a truly preventative system where continuous data enables early, preemptive intervention. And critically, this requires coordinating not just the tech, but many different human actors, all connecting via a central care platform.
So we're talking about integrating formal and informal support structures, all held together by technology. Who are the essential human moving pieces in this proactive care network?
The network is designed to integrate everyone involved in a person's life. You have the full suite of professional actors, the dedicated home carer, the occupational therapist who manages the home environment, the district nurse, the social worker, and a community responder who can quickly visit if an alarm triggers. But crucially, the system also attempts to integrate the informal, often unpaid support structure, the neighbor, the extended family, and any unpaid carers. The data is meant to flow between all of them.
And what's the technology that acts as the glue for all of this?
Well, the central platform acts as the brain. It integrates data from a whole variety of sources. This includes video devices for secure observation, environmental sensors that track activity patterns like when the fridge was opened, advanced wearables like smart rings or patches that collect physiological data, well-being apps for mental or health logging, and even smart speakers for communication or interactive prompts. The system aims to create a continuous, complete digital picture of the older person's daily life and their immediate surroundings.
So if local authorities are rolling this out on a large scale, moving from individual pilot projects to institutional solutions, they must have a rigorous, defined plan for implementation. What's the standard blueprint they follow to achieve that scale?
They rely on a pretty comprehensive 4-phase plan. It's developed to implement and scale these proactive services effectively. This is to ensure that the rollout is strategic, not just a bulk purchase of new hardware. It's a phased expansion aimed purely at measurable outcomes.
Let's walk through those phases, starting with the administrative foundation.
Okay, so phase 1 is strategy assessment and initial planning. This is where the long-term vision is established. Authorities have to define a clear vision. What exactly do they hope to achieve? For example, reducing hospital admissions by a certain percentage. And they have to build a strong business case, which primarily focuses on achieving what they call financial visibility. They need to articulate what return on investment the technology will deliver to justify that massive initial expenditure.
And then, once the strategy is signed off, the preparation begins. And this sounds like the hardest part, managing the human change.
That's phase 2. Preparation and planning. This involves developing detailed operational models and managing workforce readiness. This is often the phase where these technology deployments fail. The cultural shift required of frontline staff moving from providing hands-on care to interpreting data and troubleshooting devices is immense. Staff need robust training and buy-in, otherwise they will just reject the system. This phase also includes the essential tasks of technology assessment and selection, identifying the right solutions, and then building the benefit case, which focuses on justifying the investment and outlining how success will be measured.
And phase 3 brings the technology into real-world use, but in a controlled environment.
Yes, that's phase 3, implementation. This starts small. You run a pilot to test, validate, and rigorously refine the standard operating model. It's a crucial opportunity to complete a comprehensive risk management assessment, finding out what data points trigger false alarms, how human operators respond, and establishing transparent reporting mechanisms. They really need to find out precisely what breaks before they commit to a full rollout.
Which leads us to the final phase, institutionalizing and optimizing the system.
Phase 4, scale and optimize. Here, the rollout is commissioned based on the validated outcomes from the pilot, not just based on buying a lot of tech. It's a phased expansion across broader geographical areas. The key elements here are continuous technology development, making sure the system can adapt to new solutions, and, critically, managing quality and standards. That means maintaining rigorous benchmarks to ensure that the digital substitute doesn't accidentally degrade the quality of human support. It's a perpetual cycle of adaptation.
That blueprint is a roadmap for technological deployment. But let's circle back to Margaret's story. That feeling of the digital tether, the daughter staring at the app at 2 a.m. The system is designed to provide proactive care, but when we introduce constant monitoring into the home, we fundamentally change the nature of that relationship. When technology steps into that deeply personal space, what does it mean for autonomy and privacy?
It fundamentally opens up these crucial questions about privacy, confidentiality, and who truly owns and controls the sensor data that's being collected. When information about an older person's activities, their movements, how often they eat, their bathroom logs, when that becomes available to remote operators and family, the dynamic shifts. It moves from one of trust and independence to one of, well, constant performance.
The intent is clearly safety and liberation from institutional care, but the lived experience can feel like a kind of digital intrusion.
That is the core paradox. Telecare systems run the very real risk of turning the home into something approaching an institution. Historically, the home is a sanctuary, right? A place of privacy where you live authentically, not where you're constantly being measured against a baseline of normal behavior. When your life is under constant scrutiny by a remote, non-human system, your sense of security, ironically, can diminish, despite the stated aim of promoting independence.
And I imagine that concern is amplified by the financial context we just discussed. If local authorities are pushing this primarily because they can't afford human staff, the older person might reasonably conclude that technology is there to replace them, not just augment human contact.
Exactly. Older respondents in studies have frequently expressed the fear that telecare might be used solely to replace face-to-face, hands-on care just to cut costs. They are acutely sensitive to the possibility that their independence is being bought at the cost of being permanently scrutinized and having their dignity eroded. If the system flags them as non-compliant, meaning they didn't follow the expected pattern, it can be interpreted as a sign they are losing capacity and should be moved to a higher level of institutional care.
So this intrusive feeling, it's not just a physical objection to having sensors on the wall, it's an existential fear that the data collected will be used as evidence against their right to live independently.
It is entirely about agency. The designers, the prescribers, the installers, they must take seriously the objections of older people to these intrusions. The technology can diminish a person's sense of security, making them feel vulnerable and watched. Policy often assumes that aging in place is the ideal outcome, but that might not be so appealing if home is constantly monitored, potentially prolonging a solitary life when a more collective setting might be better, or if the technology itself becomes the primary source of stress. We must also address the massive promise Telecare holds for informal caregivers. The family members, like Margaret's daughter, who are trying to balance their own careers and family lives while perpetually worrying about a relative with chronic needs. Technology is marketed as the ultimate burden alleviator.
Right. That narrative suggests that technology should allow Margaret's daughter to finally sleep through the night, knowing the sensors are on duty. Did the research actually bear that out? Does this tech actually reduce caregiver burden, anxiety, or depression?
This is one of the most unexpected and frankly sobering findings in the research. Studies focusing on assistive technology for dementia caregivers suggest that the promise often falls short in practice. The major Attila study investigated this directly. It found that providing a full package of assistive technology in Telecare, the sensors, the apps, the proactive system, it did not show any statistically significant differences in reducing caregiver burden, anxiety, or depression levels compared to a basic package. And that's over a 6-month period.
That is a critical failure. I mean, if the entire point of the monitoring system is to alleviate the psychological stress on the family carer, and it fails to do that in a statistically significant way over 6 months, we have to ask why. Why doesn't the digital guardian actually relieve that deep psychological stress?
Because the technology doesn't remove the burden, it just shifts the labor, and it changes the form of the anxiety. Technology introduces new forms of labor that entirely offset the perceived relief. So while the system creates relief that a physical crisis might be caught, it simultaneously introduces new tasks, new skills, and constant responsibilities that often fall squarely onto the informal carer.
What does that new labor look like? Is it just, troubleshooting the router when it goes down?
It is far more involved than that. They essentially become unpaid technical maintenance staff. They're constantly charging batteries, troubleshooting connectivity and Wi-Fi issues, managing software updates, maintaining ongoing contact with providers about data anomalies, and critically, maintaining that constant self-imposed vigilance via a smartphone app. This isn't just physical labor, it's significant cognitive and emotional labor.
So the anxiety doesn't disappear. It just changes focus. Instead of worrying that you missed a phone call, you're obsessing over a static data point or a battery icon at 2 in the morning. You've substituted physical care labor for digital management labor and emotional surveillance labor.
Absolutely. The relief of knowing a sensor might catch a fall is counterbalanced by the stress that the sensor is always watching, and the knowledge that the system is only as good as the family's ability to keep the tech running smoothly and accurately. Telecare is not a technological fix in isolation. It is entirely dependent on, and often demands, the mobilization of existing or new human networks, volunteers and family carers, which inevitably adds to their already immense workload. The technology creates a dependence on a digital infrastructure that itself must be managed by the care network.
It sounds like these systems are often designed in a sterile lab environment with an assumption of proper use, where the older person behaves exactly as the system expects them to.
Yeah.
But real life is messy, people are complex, and they constantly try to reclaim their agency from the monitoring system.
That's a central finding from ethnographic research on how telecare is actually used. Older people often use telecare in unorthodox, adaptive, or unpredicted ways. And this customization is actually essential for making the technology work effectively in their specific, unique context. They assert control over the device, sometimes in direct contravention of the designer's instructions, all to prioritize their quality of life over raw data collection.
Can you give us some vivid examples of this user customization? Because this is where the human element really clashes with the rigid, prescriptive design of the technology.
We have several powerful illustrative examples that really highlight this user ingenuity. Consider the client who's given a falls monitor. It was designed to be worn constantly around the waist to ensure maximum data coverage. Instead of wearing it, they realized the frequent false alarms and the discomfort were just disruptive. So they chose to manage that risk by leaving the device carefully placed on a shelf near their bed.
That's a fascinating act of agency. They understood the system's function, but they prioritized preventing the crisis of the system itself, a false alarm disrupting the teleoperator over fulfilling the design requirement of continuous wear. They chose to manage the risk themselves.
Precisely. Or take the case of the GPS tracker given to the partner of a caregiver, a person dealing with dementia. The user kept pressing the small off button accidentally in their pocket, which rendered the tracking useless for long periods. The caregiver realized the design was flawed for real-world use. Their solution was remarkable. They created a homemade fix using matchsticks and tape to fashion a protective frame around the off button. This required ingenuity and labor, but it was a necessary adaptation to make the device functional and reliable within their unique daily routine.
That simple application of matchsticks and tape, it just speaks volumes about how inadequate the initial technology design was for the real conditions of use. It shows the user acting as the final, necessary engineer in the process.
It does. And this customization is directly related to the issue of agency loss in passive monitoring. When alarms are triggered environmentally, say a sensor detects no movement in the living room for too long, or a refrigerator door hasn't opened, that's passive monitoring. This is where the older person loses decision-making power as the system judges their behavior without their conscious input. This often leads to more false alarms and significant verification work for teleoperators. More fundamentally, it shifts the agency away from the older person, who might not even be aware the data is being collected or interpreted until the system flags them as potentially in crisis or non-compliant.
So telecare systems that are more interactive, like a fall detection button that requires conscious activation, they tend to be better received than fully passive environmental monitoring that just turns the home into a complete surveillance institution.
Absolutely. Systems where the older person can maintain physical control or opt in to certain tracking features are fundamentally different from passive environmental monitoring, which operates invisibly in the background. The most ethical telecare practice, according to these findings, involves respecting the user's creativity in customizing devices and accommodating their unorthodox use. It demands that designers acknowledge that the user is the expert in their own home, and that forcing strict adherence to a technical manual can actually undermine the goal of supporting independence.
Let's move now to the highest end of monitoring technology, systems that go far beyond simple activity sensors and GPS trackers. We are talking about the truly intelligent systems that collect deeply intimate physiological data and attempt to draw clinical conclusions from it. We'll start with what might be the definition of unobtrusive, continuous data collection: the intelligent toilet seat.
This technology is a fascinating convergence point where the Internet of Things meets diagnostic medicine, and it's developing rapidly across the globe. This involves integrating an internet-connected toilet seat with a continuous monitoring system that uses AI to generate health insights from what is often overlooked, the output of the human body: excrement and urine. The system measures numerous parameters, including volume, consistency, frequency, color, and even chemical composition.
So the vision then is that the everyday toilet becomes this highly personalized, automated, continuous laboratory, providing constant data streams to preempt illness.
That's the vision. The primary goal is the early detection of chronic issues common in aging populations, such as urinary tract infections or UTIs, gastrointestinal diseases, hydration issues, or kidney problems. The system typically identifies the user via some kind of sensor technology, maybe skin temperature or weight distribution, and then it uses computer vision and chemical sensors to analyze the physical outputs, linking any anomalies back to a designated care team dashboard for professional review.
Despite the deeply intimate nature of this kind of monitoring, the research suggests older adults are surprisingly accepting of it. What are the key perceived benefits that outweigh the obvious potential for discomfort and embarrassment?
Well, there are 4 major perceived benefits that seem to drive this high acceptance rate, and they all stem from a desire for preventative health management. First, early detection. Respondents recognize the profound potential for promptly identifying hidden issues like UTIs or digestive anomalies before they manifest into acute, painful, or severe symptoms. It facilitates timely care that avoids hospitalization. Second, healthcare cost reduction. Many believe that maintaining automated electronic records of toileting could minimize the need for regular, often unnecessary, or burdensome physician visits and the associated transportation costs. They saw it as cost-effective in the long term. Third, constant monitoring. This provides immense and enduring reassurance. Older adults felt safer knowing that key wellness indicators were being consistently overseen by healthcare professionals, ensuring that critical health deviations won't go unnoticed. And fourth, the technology is highly easy to use. It requires minimal setup and operates autonomously. Users really appreciate that they don't have to manually transmit data or log entries. They just use the bathroom as normal.
That ease of use is such a critical design factor, especially for technology targeting older users. But even with those benefits, what are the ethical frictions that cause discomfort or anxiety for potential users?
The concerns are deeply personal, and they fall into a few clear categories. The first one is obvious: embarrassment. It's associated with the intimate nature of the data collection. Even if the technology is discreet, the knowledge that highly personal toileting logs are being generated and transmitted can evoke significant discomfort and shame.
And just as we saw with the movement sensors in the kitchen, the system designed for reassurance can itself generate anxiety.
Exactly. There's a real risk of unnecessary concerns or heightened anxiety. Continuous monitoring can lead to users becoming preoccupied with minor, non-critical health anomalies, a slightly different color or frequency than the previous day. Frequent warnings or notifications, particularly for individuals already dealing with chronic stress, can be overwhelming and exacerbate their psychological distress. Researchers have suggested custom notification settings, allowing users to choose a consolidated daily or weekly summary over real-time alerts.
And then there is the biggest technological and legal hurdle, which has to be addressed to ensure trust in such intimate data collection, privacy, and security.
The privacy and security concerns are paramount because we are discussing perhaps the most sensitive category of personal data you could imagine. Toileting logs being sent over the internet to a central database create massive security risks. Respondents emphasize the absolute need for strict adherence to guidelines like HIPAA, ensuring that data is thoroughly anonymized, never linked with personal identifiers, and critically, not shared with third parties for non-consented uses like insurance or commercial research. There is deep apprehension that data breaches targeting this intimate data could lead to humiliation or discrimination.
That need for HIPAA compliance is vital. For our listener, why is that specific regulatory compliance so essential when the data is this personal?
Because the data generated by the smart toilet is effectively a detailed, real-time medical record of excretory function. If that data were to be de-anonymized and breached, it could reveal severe, embarrassing, or stigmatizing chronic conditions, gastrointestinal problems, kidney failure, specific diseases, which could then potentially be used against the individual by insurance companies or potential employers. Strict adherence to data privacy rules is the only way to ensure the system is trusted and deployed responsibly.
Let's loop back to that surprising finding regarding adoption. Despite the utility for early detection, why are people rushing to install this in their private homes?
It's fascinating. Despite the high acceptance rate, a survey found a large majority, 83.9% of older adults exhibited positive attitudes, and 64.9% were willing to use it. The context matters dramatically. The majority suggested the most appropriate setting was nursing homes at 63.8% or rehabilitation centers. That's compared to only 10.9% for personal use in independent homes. This suggests that while older adults recognize the powerful clinical value of this kind of monitoring, they feel it's better suited for an institutional setting where centralized care management is already expected and accepted, rather than disrupting their private, independent domestic space with constant surveillance.
Okay, now let's shift to physiological diagnosis, specifically the detection of chronic conditions like obstructive sleep apnea, where AI analyzes data from wearables like smartwatches or rings. This condition is often silent, it's underdiagnosed, it affects millions globally, and leads to really serious long-term health issues.
Right, and the current gold standard for diagnosis, which is called polysomnography or PSG, has significant practical drawbacks. It's extremely expensive, highly inconvenient. It requires the patient to spend a full night in an unfamiliar sleep lab with dozens of sensors attached, and the resulting data analysis is often subjective. It depends heavily on the sleep clinician's experience. Furthermore, that stressful, unfamiliar environment can trigger what's called a first-night effect, meaning the physiological parameters recorded may not fully reflect the individual's typical sleep behavior at home.
So, wearable AI, using an algorithm to analyze heart rate, blood oxygen levels, movement, all from a wrist-worn device. It offers convenience, accessibility, objectivity, and real-time in-home monitoring. It solves most of PSG's clinical and logistical drawbacks. But how good is it clinically? This isn't just lifestyle data. This is diagnostic data you need to treat a chronic condition.
We have some detailed meta-analysis findings on the performance of wearable AI in this field, and the picture is one of powerful potential mixed with, well, current serious limitations. When analyzing the overall performance in detecting apnea events versus non-apnea events, the pooled mean accuracy of wearable AI across multiple studies was 89.3%. That's a very high number that suggests immense promise for a remote system.
89.3% accuracy for a remote, often wrist-worn device. That sounds nearly ready for market.
Yeah.
Where's the critical limitation? We need to understand the nuances of this performance.
The limitation lies in the uneven performance metrics, sensitivity versus specificity. The key distinction for you, the listener, is this. Specificity measures the system's ability to correctly identify when a problem is not occurring. True negatives. Sensitivity measures the system's ability to correctly identify when the problem is occurring. True positives. The wearable AI was much better at detecting non-apnea events, that's 94.6% specificity, than it was at detecting apnea events, which was only 79.3% sensitivity. That's the ability to spot the actual crisis moment when the person stops breathing.
Let's stop on that 79.3% sensitivity number. If it's only right about 4 out of 5 times when the patient actually stops breathing, what is the real-world danger of that suboptimal performance in a clinical setting?
The danger is the false negative rate. A sensitivity of 79.3% means that over 20% of people who actually have sleep apnea will be missed by the device and incorrectly told they are fine. For a potentially life-threatening condition that carries huge risks for cardiovascular disease and stroke, missing 1 out of every 5 true cases is clinically unacceptable for a primary diagnostic tool. This is why the current performance is officially deemed suboptimal for routine clinical use.
So why the discrepancy? Why is the system so good at confirming normality at 94.6%, but struggles with detecting the critical failure at just 79.3%?
The analysis points to a classic machine learning failure: training data bias. The AI models were likely trained on an unrepresentative sample. When researchers aggregated the data from all the studies, they found there were far more non-apnea respiratory events, over 1.6 million, than there were actual apnea events, which totaled around 872,000. This massive imbalance means the model became overly optimized to recognize the common, non-problematic state, making it less robust and less reliable when faced with the rare, critical apnea event, which is the whole point of the diagnosis.
What factors then actually improve the performance? Are there particular algorithms or device placements that can break through that sensitivity barrier?
Yes, 3 factors stood out as critical moderators of performance. First, the algorithm type. Deep learning algorithms, such as convolutional neural networks or CNNs, performed demonstrably better than traditional machine learning algorithms. This superiority is attributed to their ability to capture the localized, complex, time-dependent dependencies that you see in apnea patterns that simpler models often miss.
Second, there was a difference based on whether the device was commercial or research grade, which implies a cost factor.
That's the device status. Non-commercial or research-grade devices exhibited higher specificity. They were better at ruling out problems than commercial devices. And this is likely a financial factor. Researchers using non-commercial devices can utilize computationally expensive deep learning models and custom sensors more readily. Commercial manufacturers, constrained by profit margins and the need for scalable, low-power solutions that consumers can wear every day, often rely on less expensive machine learning models or simpler sensor arrays, which may compromise diagnostic precision.
The profit motive is literally limiting the diagnostic power of the devices we just go out and buy. And finally, the physical location on the body where the device is placed seemed to matter significantly for reliability.
Correct. The placement of the wearable device dramatically affected its ability to correctly spot apnea, its sensitivity. Sensitivity was significantly higher when devices were placed on the chest and abdomen compared to being placed on the wrist or fingers. This is intuitive. The signal quality needed for accurate detection of respiratory changes requires monitoring closer to the respiratory action itself, capturing chest wall movement or deeper physiological signals that are attenuated by the time they reach the wrist.
So the promise is tremendous, but the technology isn't fully clinical grade yet. What are the key gaps researchers identify that need urgent attention to bridge that divide between 79.3% sensitivity and the reliability required for a full diagnosis?
Researchers identified 3 areas requiring urgent attention to move the field forward from simple detection to truly proactive diagnosis. First, the focus must shift from diagnosis to prediction. Almost all studies, 97% of them, focused merely on detecting current sleep apnea. Only a tiny fraction explored the possibility of predicting its future occurrence, identifying individuals who are likely to develop the condition within the next few years. Prediction is pivotal because it's the only way to enable truly proactive interventions before the condition becomes severe.
We're still in reactive mode, just a slightly faster reactive mode, but with the different kinds of sleep apnea.
That leads to the second significant gap, central sleep apnea, or CSA. CSA is a distinct, less common form where the signals from the brain to the muscles that control breathing aren't generated correctly. It's neurologically based. Only a single study evaluated the effectiveness of wearable AI in identifying CSA. This signals a massive research gap, likely due to the rarity of cases and the inherent difficulty in distinguishing its signals from other types of respiratory events.
And finally, the AI models are operating with incomplete information. They are highly dependent on the physiological data stream itself, but they're ignoring the critical medical context of the patient.
Precisely. The third gap is data incorporation. Only 8% of studies incorporated crucial non-wearable data, such as signals from smart pillows or mobile phones, or, critically, self-reported health data like medical history, BMI, or demographics. The inclusion of this contextual information, knowing that a patient has high blood pressure or is severely overweight, has the potential to significantly enhance the efficacy and predictive power of the AI models. Ignoring these broader health indicators is a major oversight. And we should also note that wearable AI's accuracy in correctly classifying the severity level of sleep apnea, moving beyond just detecting it to rating it as normal, mild, moderate, or severe, was only 65.1%. This suggests a high degree of imprecision when it comes to clinical grading, even when the presence of the condition is correctly identified.
This deep dive shows us that the convergence of a deep-seated crisis in human care, that 10% cost squeeze on providers we started with, and the rapid advancement of AI is pushing us into an entirely new model of living and aging, one driven by financial necessity as much as technological ambition.
And we've confirmed that this technology is not yet the ironclad proof that can replace comprehensive human assessment. Whether it's wearable AI reaching that 89.3% overall accuracy but faltering dangerously on high-stakes sensitivity, or intimate bathroom monitoring, the results are powerful for data collection but suboptimal for full, reliable clinical substitution. Our recommendation remains clear. Wearable AI must be used concurrently with traditional assessments until the evidence of reliability is undeniable.
And ethically, the convergence presents a profound trade-off. We saw that while people are highly accepting of futuristic, intimate monitoring, like the smart toilet, they are also highly vulnerable to new anxieties. The initial relief of being watched, which Margaret's daughter felt, can quickly morph into the stress of being constantly scrutinized or the digital labor of maintaining a complex yet potentially inaccurate surveillance system.
To manage this trade-off effectively, the most ethical telecare practice involves respecting the user's creativity in customizing devices, like that matchsticks and tape solution to restore agency, and accommodating their unorthodox use. Telecare is fundamentally not a universal technical solution. It is always a situated practice, entirely dependent on existing or newly mobilized human networks of volunteers, family, and professionals. The technology relies entirely on the very human connection and labor it is often deployed to reduce or replace.
We've analyzed the financial forces driving this shift, examined the deep ethical tensions introduced by monitoring the most intimate parts of the home, and detailed the current imperfect performance of cutting-edge AI diagnosis. The real challenge in this new digital era is ensuring that we maintain the human element. The goal isn't just to use data to keep people alive and in their homes, but to ensure that the quality of life they preserve is truly independent, not merely a form of highly sophisticated, digitally managed existence.